Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grim Flayer. Hope you're doing very well today, and we are here to talk about BG the Rock and Pioneer in the brand new format. Actually, it's not even brand new. It's not even out yet. The leagues begin tomorrow, but we are going to begin talking about what to play in those leagues today. So, some might say it is a fool's errand to try to build a fair interactive midrange deck in a brand new format where we don't really know what decks we're even trying to beat. We do have some information, there's enough speculation driving what people will play that we can make some predictions, but ultimately nobody really knows how it's all going to play out. Those same people might even say it's even more foolish to do so because we don't have great fetch lands, we don't have Tarmogoyf, and we don't have Liliana of the Veil, among other things. But to those naysayers, I say, well, look, guys, green-black is the greatest colored pairing there is across all formats, if you ask me, and we really do have a lot of modern carryover. A very significant portion of our most impactful cards in Modern are coming to a much lower powered format in Pioneer, so I'm very optimistic that we can make it work, and we are going to dive into my Day Zero deck tech right away. But first we have to shout out the people responsible for this. Of course, in general, the supporters on Patreon do make all of this content possible, including me getting 74 of these 75 cards ready to roll. Granted, I did own a lot of them, but many others I did have to pick up, so your support does help me bring you the content as soon as possible instead of having to, really watch the market, maybe wait for prices to dip back down. I can bring you some content, and I'm going to start playing leagues with this tomorrow, so look for a gameplay video tomorrow. Specific patrons we have to thank are Road Rage 48 and Patrick, who are of the Veil tier supporters, very generous, the highest level of support. And these guys, they did qualify for a donation league, so I reached out and said, what do you want the donation league to be? And they had an idea or two, but they also were wondering what is the deal with Pioneer. And I said, my initial plan was actually to kind of wait and see on Pioneer and just keep playing a little bit of Modern while Pioneer unfolded. But I said, guys, what do you think about using your donation league for me to do a deep dive on BG the Rock and Pioneer before we even have the ability to play games in the format? They're down, and so here we are. So thank you once again to Road Rage 48 and Patrick. And without further ado, let's talk about BG Rock and Pioneer. Alright guys, you know the concept of Rock. We are executing the same strategy in Pioneer as we do in Modern. We are interacting with very efficient cards on a 1-for-1 or sometimes 2-for-1 basis, or sometimes establishing repeated value out of a permanent that snowballs our advantages. And while we are doing so, we are having flexible, main deckable, pseudo-hate / pseudo-beater cards, and even some straight-up beaters that offer upsides of card advantage or card selection, and eventually our small advantages snowball into very large ones, and the opponent is buried in our advantage, and or they are finished off before they can recover from our really efficient disruption. That's the idea of black-based midrange, and basically any format. Pioneer is going to be no exception. So we're going to go line by line. Before we do, I'm going to point out that I'm sure it's already bugging some of you that we have 16 sideboard cards. I'm just going to tell you what's up with that right away so it doesn't distract you. These 4 cards I'm going to narrow down to 3. So you can think about that while I'm talking if you like. I just wanted to really bring all 4 of these to your attention. As you see, we're playing a lot of 1 and 2-ofs. It's a very hedged, very diverse sideboard, and even main deck to a certain degree. So that's what the 16 cards are about. We'll talk about that, of course, in more depth when we get there, but we're going to go line by line, beginning with the main deck. Alright, my friends, we got 23 lands. I think that's going to be the right balance. I've seen lists playing all the way up to 24. I think that's fair. I think it's better to err on the side of more lands rather than too many lands rather than too few, and that does let you play Quagmire 3 and 4 if you want. I considered that. I considered 4 Quagmire, 24 land. I did decide to go to a more moderate stance of 23 lands. I also see people going all the way down to 22, maybe leaning more heavily on Deathrite Shaman to ramp. To me, it's unclear how Shaman will play, and it's also unclear how much Fabled Passage will hurt us, because Passage, of course, is to some degree a necessary evil. It's a very weak land overall. I don't recommend that most decks play Fabled Passage unless they really need to fix their mana. They're playing a super greedy list with a lot of basics to fetch, or they're playing things like Deathrite Shaman and like Delirium, where they really need some kind of a fetch land, even if it's subpar relative to what we're used to. So I am taking the middle road with my land base. We're playing 23 lands total. I think that's correct with the rest of the build in mind. And yes, we do have 4 copies of Fabled Passage, because we do just want Deathrite Shaman as our best turn 1 play besides discard in a vacuum. And Grimflayer is our most proactive threat. Grimflayer is kind of the Tarmogoyf of this deck. Very exciting, by the way, to be jamming my namesake card again. He's been in my lists occasionally here and there. We did try a one-of Flayer alongside a couple of Unearths, for example, when Modern Horizons came out. And he's always been a fine one-of in Modern, but usually he's just a little bit outclassed overall. But here he's kind of the premier threat, so that's very cool. And we're going to see how 4 Fabled Passage works for us. I think we are one of the few decks that really does probably want to run these, but we'll have to see. 4 copies of Overgrown Tomb. This is just kind of our best land overall, I think. And while it looks really weird from a Modern perspective to play the full 4 Shockland, I think it's probably going to be the best way to consistently produce the mana we need. But it's one of many things about the deck. Just keep this in mind. We do take a lot of pain, despite being an only 2-colored deck. So if you see a lot of life gain effects in the deck going forward as we talk about the spells, remember that we do play 4 Overgrown Tomb among other reasons to run lots of life gain, including the fact that we expect the format to be pretty aggressive from the get-go. 4 Blooming Marsh, of course, no reason not to do this. Some people in Modern only play 3 because they think the 4th one coming in tapped sometimes is too much of a downside, and there are enough other good lands to compete with this. I don't do that, but I can kind of see why. But here, I think we just got to play the 4. And we do have 5 basic lands. It's a fine number to start with. Maybe we tweak up or down from here. And I have decided to, deviate from the beloved Onslaught basics you see me play in Modern, because it's a new format. We got to do something new. So we've got 2 of my favorite basic arts on this swamp and this forest, both from the Masters Edition online. You gotta love that. 3 copies of Field of Ruin, I don't know how necessary these will be relative to how necessary they are in Modern, which is quite necessary, but they're a pretty free inclusion in our 2-color deck. They fuel Delirium and Deathrite Shaman, and maybe we punish greedy decks as well with it. I don't know. And if the format is excessively fair, there's going to be a lot of opposing Manlands, perhaps, or at least some. So Field of Ruins got its uses. We're going to begin with 3. Speaking of Manlands, 2 Hissing Quagmire. As mentioned, I drew up one list that had the full 4. I think you're going to see some lists doing that. It might even be correct, but I'm starting with a more moderate amount of 2. Remember that it is a mana sink for a relatively weak clock. It is definitely more appealing as a blocker against maybe some stuff that I'm not convinced we're going to see all that much of, with the possible exception of Eldrazi. But, we still do have 2 copies of it. It's still pretty sweet here. And I am going to still try to fit in a 1 of Castle Lochthwain, because this card has performed excellently for me in Modern. And if anything, of course, this format is going to be slower. We should have more time to leverage the castle. Just, again, having a few question marks over a few other things. I'm not going to push my limits by trying to play a second one, at least right off the bat. I think this castle as a 1-of is totally fine. So there we go. That's the land base, 23 lands. And moving on, my friends, to the 1 mana spells, we have 4 copies of Fatal Push. It did occur to me that 4 may not be strictly correct or might not be as much of an auto-include as they are in Modern, again, simply because the lack of good fetch lands makes these a little bit worse. But then, the more I thought about it, the more I said, this is still kind of the premier removal spell, certainly at 1 mana in the new format. Like, it might not be as good as it is in Modern, but at least unlike Lightning Bolt, it exists, right? And we actually play as many fetch lands in this exact build as we do in Modern, and as many Fields of Ruin. We don't have Nurturing Peatland, of course, as another possible way to generate Revolt, but we kind of have a lot of sources anyway, especially when you include the clues off of Tireless Tracker. So, I think Fatal Push is going to be very strong for us. I think we're going to be one of the decks that leverages it the best, and therefore we're going to play 4. Speaking of 4-ofs, well, 4 copies of Thoughtseize. This is something I've never done, of course, because we have Inquisition to share the load with it in Modern, but here in Pioneer, there is no other premier, universally good discard spell. So we're just basically priced into playing 4 copies of Thoughtseize if early discard is still central to our game plan, which of course, in my view, it is. So 4 copies of Thoughtseize. This 4th one has eluded me. I've ordered the rest of the cards. This one it's continually out of stock, every single printing, so hopefully I can get that before tomorrow, but shouldn't be an issue. I'll just keep checking. Anyway, that's just another reason that our progressions are going to be really painful, like, no pun intended, shockingly painful relative to Modern, at least some of the time, depending on how the early sequences line up. So again, that's more incentive for us to play a good amount of life gain in the 75, which we are. There's 1 copy of Duress here in the main deck. This is obviously a little bit of a question mark, but I do think it's main deckable. I did even ask this in the Discord. This is the last thing I decided on in my main deck. I was like, you guys think one of Duress is main deckable in the Pioneer format? I think it is. Most people seem to think it is as well. It's not the end of the world if it's dead because we're only playing 1 copy. It's not like we're jamming all 3 copies main deck and hoping they line up, being very sad against like a tribal deck, especially if they're not on Coco. I think 1 of Duress is totally fine. I expect there to be a lot of Planeswalkers, a lot of combo decks. Should have good enough targets. And again, only 1, not the end of the world if it happens to be a whiff, because your discard is a whiff a non-zero amount of the time anyway, when people empty their hand too fast, right? We also have Collective Brutality to pitch the dead Duress, to pitch the dead Thoughtseizes, and also as more discard to supplement those effects. Finally, in the 1 mana slot, that's right, this is the single most exciting thing about BG Rock and Pioneer, and it might not even be that good, but even if it's not that good, it is still the most exciting thing. Guys, we are playing an underpowered format relative to Modern, and we're getting to jam Deathrite Shaman, the quintessential 1 mana Planeswalker, the most banned fair card ever, basically. And this guy does everything. Exiles a land card from a graveyard, add 1 mana of any color. Black and tap, exile an instant or sorcery, drain the opponent for 2. Green and tap, exile target creature card from a graveyard, you gain 2 life. So I'm just not convinced that we need to play the full 4. I'm also not convinced, some people say this card's not going to be good in Pioneer. I don't know about that. I think it's going to be at least a role player in a deck like ours, and I think 3, I'm playing a ton of 3-ofs, so Deathrite Shaman, I guess, is not an exception to the 3-of creature max that I've kind of found myself on. I think 3 is going to be the right number. We don't necessarily want to be flooded with them, but we probably want to see 1 every game. We can probably leverage 1 pretty well every game, so there we go. We'll start with 3, maybe tweak that up or tweak that down as the games go. On to the CMC2 action, my friends, and I already touched on Brutality, but of course, this is just our main deck flex card. It's our catch-all. It's whatever we need it to be. Every mode on its own is a little bit underpowered, but that makes up for that with the flexibility and with the ability to escalate should the situation demand it. I also expect the red deck wins archetypes to be pretty common for Collected Company decks to be pretty powerful. I don't know how common they're going to be, but I bet they're going to be pretty powerful. And I think they're certainly going to be a bigger presence in Pioneer than they are currently in Modern. And again, the fact that it's supplementary discard, I think this card is going to be well positioned enough to main deck 2 of them. Even almost played a 3rd in the side, but we're going to try out some other stuff as well. And we'll see how it goes, especially if we're not entirely sure about how everything's going to be standing in the format. Playing the flex spell, never really a bad idea. Scavenging Ooze. So, little story about Skoos. One of my favorite cards in Modern, one of the most underappreciated cards that makes our archetype tick in Modern. But I was actually not that thrilled about its presence in Pioneer, because I was like, well, we're just not going to be able to leverage it as well. We have Deathrite Shaman. I've always said in Modern, if Deathrite Shaman became legal, we would probably be trimming like a land and a Skoos to start, and then maybe some other things, tweaking from there. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I still kind of think we might want the 3 Skoos. Again, the format's going to be aggressive right off the bat. There's the lack of Nile Spellbomb makes our direct graveyard hate options a lot less appealing. So I kind of like playing the full complement, or the nearly full complement, I guess, of Skoos to help facilitate the wins against graveyard decks, especially Game 1. And we don't have Tarmogoyf, so we do need 2 mana threats that can close out the game, and we've all seen Skoos get nice and fat, nice and healthy, and be the way to stabilize a game and then close it out. So while I initially was starting to conceptualize lists with fewer than 3, I ended up actually opting for 3. We'll see how it goes. Speaking of 3-ofs, we've got a bunch more 3-ofs rounding out the 2 mana slot with the gold cards here. 3 copies of Abrupt Decay, 3 copies of Assassin's Trophy. Guys, we are spoiled that we get to port both of these cards from Modern directly into Pioneer. They're both going to be awesome. If anything, I think Decay might be slightly better positioned than Trophy, kind of in an inverse situation of Modern, where they're both great in Modern, but you probably want a few more trophies than Decays overall, or at least one more if you've got an uneven number. If anything, I might play the 4th Decay over the 4th Trophy if I was playing 7 of these effects, but we're going to start with a 3-3 split, see how they do. And Trophy is just less efficient than Decay, but, there's no... The lack of efficiency can't compare to the bad feels, where if you draw a Decay and it's dead and you really needed to draw a Trophy to hit their, Aetherworks Marvel or whatever it's going to be, right? So 3-3 looks awesome. And 3 copies of my main man, the Grim Flayer. I've been sharpening my axe in the woods all week in preparation for this, and we're almost ready to go after him with the Flayer. And this guy's just a great fit in BG Rock. Again, a little bit outclassed these days in Modern, but if you've got Delirium online, it's going to be a 4/4 with Trample for 2. It's a very good rate, and it's going to give you card selection as well. He can set up his own Delirium, of course, if you're able to clear the way for the first hit. He can often get Delirium online by the next time he's ready to attack. And, of course, dumping things into the graveyard. Fuels Deathrite Shaman, fuels Scavenging Ooze, sets up Courser of Krufix top decks. You can just really imagine the value in the synergy here. So I actually was initially thinking 4 copies of Flayer, but again, not sure how everything is going to play. We're just doing 3-ofs across the board. I think that's a totally fine... I didn't artificially cap myself at that. It's just kind of how things developed. I think that's a totally fine way to begin testing. And in the 3-drop column, we kick things off with 2 copies of Liliana the Last Hope. And look, I love the Last Hope. I even played 2 of her main deck for a period of time in Modern. This was a while ago, admittedly, but I've always been quite high on the card. It's only very, very recently that she's finally not made it as at least a 1-of in my Modern 75s. But look, she's our premier 3-drop value flexible walker in this format, of course, without Liliana of the Veil around. But I see a lot of lists playing 3, which I think is probably okay, or even 4 copies of Last Hope, which I don't agree with. Look, she's way worse in multiples than Lily of the Veil. Lily of the Veil, you got him in multiples. You got a free pitch when you +1 if you've got an otherwise full grip. Or you Edict, get the value, and then play another one out. She was already at 1, or maybe even had to cash her into Edict for the first time. So Liliana of the Veil is kind of uniquely good in multiples as far as a Planeswalker goes. Liliana the Last Hope is amazing, but there's nothing about her that's especially unique in multiples. So I am choosing to only play 2. I think she's going to be very good, but only 2-of for me for now. And another 2-of here, Murderous Rider. I think this card is pretty sweet, and I think it's going to be even better in Pioneer than it is in Modern. It's just our built-in 2-for-1. It's like a straight 2-for-1. It's another form of life loss, but remember, in those red deck wins matchups or against hyper aggro, Of other flavors, you can just deploy it as a 2/3 lifelink, which is underrate for 3 mana, but the flexibility, much like Collective Brutality, makes up for that. So it's a 2-for-1 in fair matchups, and it's Hero's Downfall with upside and others. Gotta love it. 3 copies of Tireless Tracker, so notably we do not have Dark Confidant, and I chose not to play this card, even though I think it's very interesting. Glint Sleeve Siphoner. It's kind of the Bob, the Dark Confidant of the format. It's a 2/1 with Menace, and you get to draw for only 1 life loss instead of the Bob variants, anyway, from 0 to 5. But, of course, it requires a lot more setup than Bob. Nowhere near as powerful overall. I think the card's playable, it might even be the best way to play Rock. Who knows if you've playing some number of these for earlier pressure and card advantage, but I decided to go a little bit bigger to begin with than the Glint Sleeve Siphoner, so without any Bob or Bob replacement in the deck, I feel we need to play at least 3 copies of Tireless Tracker to get some genuine straight-up card advantage, and that's what we're doing here. We got 3 copies. We'll see how that goes, but we know how good Tracker is. She is an all-star. You gotta love it. And finally, my friends, in that 3-drop slot, we do have a Courser of Kruphix, which has been a one-of in some of my modern lists, just here and there. It's a good hedge. It's a good extra hedge against the red deck wins archetypes, and it's kind of a way to diversify our ways to accrue card advantage alongside Tracker. It's kind of like competing with the 4th Tracker, and I think it's worth playing that over the 4th Tracker at the moment, especially considering the synergies with Grimflayer. If you happen to have this in the graveyard, that's of course an elusive type for Delirium, and the top of deck manipulation with these 2 combined is pretty sweet, and it's a perfectly playable card in its own right, so one of course are very cool. Moving on here, let's begin with this Garrick Relentless. This is actually not Pioneer legal, but I put this in as like a flex, like a placeholder in terms of what I want to do. So here's where you come in, my friends. Here is where the channel gets to have its say. I kind of have an open slot in the main deck, and I am thinking of, I would love to play another Planeswalker that is not going to be a 2nd copy of Vraska or a 3rd copy of Liliana the Last Hope. I would actually maybe play Garrick Relentless itself if it was in M14 instead of M11 or whenever it came out. But, so we've got here a few different options. We could, of course, just play another Vraska, which I think is interesting. We could play another Questing Beast, which is interesting, but it does put us up to 17 creatures, I believe. I think that might be a little bit much. I kind of want another piece of interaction, or a permanent with a recursive value, maybe more than another creature. But I'm open to any suggestion here. Or we could use this to go over the top and play like a big top-end card like Nissa in the main deck, or even the new 6-mana Garrick, which is one reason I used Garrick Relentless as a as a placeholder here. Maybe we could play Nissa Vital Force in the slot, play Big Garrick in the side. I just don't know how much luxury we're going to have to play these 5 and 6 drop type game-winning value pieces, right? But definitely an interesting one. Or we could play something like a Kalitas, their main deck. So Garrick Relentless is the flex slot, the placeholder that needs to be replaced. We don't even have to necessarily go with another high curve thing, although I think we probably should. But if you want to make the case for another 1 or 2 mana spell in that spot, please, my friends, by all means do so. So let me know what your vote is for the Garrick slot here, but we're definitely playing at least 1 Questing Beast, which is going to be, just like it is in Modern, a good way to close out the game proactively, run over the top of the weenies, tag Planeswalkers along the way, win races. Great blocker and attacker at the same time, very nice card. And I think a 1 of Vraska at least is going to be very nice. We've got the Abrupt Decay effect, we've got life gain, we've got card advantage, we've got recursive value, we've got it all with Vraska. Just not sure I want to play a second. So let me know about that, but there's our main deck. Let me know, of course, what you think about other decisions in the main deck here, my friends. That's it, and let's move on to the side. Okay, moving on to the sideboard, and I guess we're going to just swap the order here of these 2 columns because this is the one that's a little bit wonky that I'm going to cut 1 spell from. So let's just talk about these. We've got Cast Down. This card I feel is a little bit underrated, a little bit underplayed. It's just a 2-mana kill spell. It's kind of like a Terminate, a little bit worse, but obviously a lot more castable in our straight green-black deck, and I think this could round out the removal really, really nicely. Legion's End. This is a card that I have not quite been high enough on to play in Modern, but I think it's more appealing, of course, with more limited options, and specifically since we lack Maelstrom Pulse here in this format, I do believe Legion's End, with the 2-for-1 potential, does become more appealing. And look, it does a lot. It does a lot. If we think that it's going to line up well against graveyard decks, I'm kind of into that. If we think it's going to line up well against red deck wins, against tribal strategies, against you name it, I think this might have a lot of use cases. I think this might be a really spicy one. And of course, we do get a little bit of incidental hand information, if not hand hate, off of it. Liliana's Triumph, we are totally bereft of edict effects in the deck without this, so that and the 2-for-1 potential and the fact that it just shores up our removal suite in matchups where killing creatures matters, including if they're trying to power out Emrakul or some other combo deck like that. Yeah, Liliana's Triumph seems like a very playable one. And finally, we have the Elder Spell, and this is, again, a card that I'm not personally high enough on to play in Modern. I think it might be a bit of a trap in Modern overall, even though Planeswalkers are very powerful. But here, if it turns into Planeswalker Central, Battle Cruiser Magic, we could potentially do worse than playing an Elder Spell of our own, especially because we do have a decent number of Planeswalkers on our side for that additional value, that additional upside. So remember, my friends, you're voting on or sharing your opinion on what goes in the main deck instead of the Garrick Relentless placeholder. You are also sharing your opinion on what of these 4 I should cut. Because I think playing all 4 of these, I don't really want to cut anything else from over here. I think we should lose one of these 4. So let me know which one you think is least necessary, least impactful, and the least good fit with the rest of the deck. Okay, moving on past that, for the rest of the remainder of the black cards, we've got 2 more copies of Duress. This is going to give us that critical mass of discard effects in matchups where Duress is live. We're going to bring them all in. We've still got the 1 main deck, so we're going to be very, very flush with ways to disrupt the opposition's hand. Obviously, really, really nice there. And hey, Duress is a modern playable card in BG the Rock. The fact that this is painless and hits anything besides creatures and lands, well, that's really, really good. It does see play in Eternal formats for a reason. We also have an Infernal Reckoning because while I can't quite bring myself to play this in Modern due to the fact that Eldrazi Tron has so many other payoffs besides creatures, here I expect an Eldrazi deck in this format to be a little bit more vulnerable to this type of interaction, and boy do I hate the Eldrazi Menace, so we're going to play an Infernal Reckoning. Their day of reckoning has come. The Eldrazi will not escape us, or at least they're not going to run us over quite as easily as they might otherwise. We got a copy of Lost Legacy. Of course, no surgical extraction in this format, but Lost Legacy, a little bit too slow for Modern, but I think it could be really useful here. I hope that our combo matchups in general are going to be pretty solid between all of the discard and the fact that hopefully a lot of combo decks will be playing out things to the board that are necessary for them to combo and that we can kill with Trophy and Decay. That said, one of Lost Legacy is going to be a really nice I win button against some of these decks and or a piece of the puzzle toward putting together a victory. Rounding out the black cards, we've got a couple of anti-fair deck cards. Gonti, Lord of Luxury. This is some spice. I haven't really seen anybody play this, but I've seen 1 or 2 people jam it in Modern, just maybe as a fun of, and it's been in the back of my mind for a little while, and I think I'm going to try it here. So we've got a 2/3 Death Touch, so already that's reasonable enough as a baseline in matchups where attacking and blocking matters. And then, of course, you are looking at the top 4 upon ETB, exiling this is of the opponent's library, exiling one of those cards face down, bottoming the rest, and then you can look at and cast that card for as long as it remains exiled. You can spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast that spell. So this is a guaranteed 2-for-1 of some kind, and that can be really, really sweet. We're going to see how it goes, but I'm inclined to give Gonti a shot. But, if you have alternative suggestions for this type of role, of course, you can let me know. Kalitas is also good in fair matchups in mid-range mirrors against, fair tribal aggro decks. Also very good against hyper aggro with lifelink, and also brings us that incidental graveyard hate. We know what Kalitas does. He can take over a game if you get to untap with him, so gotta play Kalitas. Again, he could even be main decked, who knows. And moving on, my friends, we got a copy of Blast Zone. This is another thing I haven't really been seeing people do on the Rock, and I don't know if it's going to be that good, but I also think, we have some sweeper alternatives that we're missing. There's no Damnation, there's no EE, I believe. I didn't check either of those specifically, but I don't think they're either is legal. And then we are competing with alternatives for the slot like Languish, which is good. Languish is good, but Languish feels a lot worse without Tarmogoyf. Even a Delirious Flayer dies to Languish. We have to really sink a lot of mana and have the right circumstances for anything, and that's namely just Scooz and Tracker to survive a Languish. Even Questing Beast doesn't survive it, so I'm not as high on Languish. It's still fine, but Cry of the Carnarium is another option here. Yahini's Expertise is another option, right? Yahini's Expertise, the 2-for-1. These are all interesting, but I was thinking of them. I wasn't really satisfied with any of them, and then the idea of Blast Zone occurred to me, and I was like, maybe we just play Blast Zone on the side. We'll see, but I think I'm going to give it a shot. Naturalize, we got to get more old bordered cards in here, right? So there's our Onslaught Naturalize, and you know what it does, it's just a disenchant, and it is going to shore up those types of matchups. And then we have a copy of Nissa Vital Force for the control matchups for the mid-range mirrors, just a good game-breakingly powerful top-end card. Pretty happy to play her in a format like this. Seems like it's going to be a good fit. And finally, we have 2 copies of Grafdigger's Cage, which seems to me to be just about the best hard graveyard hate we have access to, and has the upside of shutting down Collected Company, which is otherwise a very, very good card against us. So I think we're going to want to bring in cages against the company decks, as well, of course, as the graveyard decks, and any kind of tutoring this can shut down is a bonus as well. So I've never really played more than 1 in Modern, but I think we do want 2 here. Again, some of the competing alternatives are not with us. Finally, Pithing Needle. This is a card I've considered more than once registering in Modern, but ultimately I just don't think it's quite a BGX card conceptually. I think it's a better fit in other archetypes than in BGX. I just think that like a static hate piece that doesn't do anything else, unless it's something that really shores up a weakness like Ashiok does in Modern against the big mana decks, that we can probably get more mileage out of discard and destroying things and playing threats and clocking than we can out of sitting behind a static hate piece. That said, again, our options in this format are a lot more limited, and I think Pithing Needle is going to have a lot of good targets, especially when early on people are going to be playing probably a lot of combo, probably a lot of linear stuff. Hopefully Pithing Needle will line up well against decks like that. So there it is, my friends. There is my Day 0 take, my first initial look at BG the Rockin' Pioneer. And guys, when I get off of work tomorrow on Thursday, I will be playing this deck through a league, so make sure, don't hesitate, let me know what you think I should play instead of Garrick Relentless in the main deck, and which one of these 4 2-mana basically kill spells with different use cases should come out of the sideboard. So that was my first foray into Pioneer mid-range. I hope you liked it. Of course, let me know what else is on your radar, what matchups you think we should be worried about, what other brews you're doing. Feel free to leave your own list in the comment below. And shout out once again to Road Rage 48 and Patrick. Thank you for giving me the incentive to do this ahead of time, rather than what I was going to do, which is kind of like let the format unfold a little bit, see what happens. But because this was your donation league of sorts, league quote unquote, we are definitely pleased to have been able to do this ahead of time, and hopefully this helps some other people out there get ready for the format before it's even live. So thanks once again to you guys. Thanks once again to all patrons who do make this content possible. And remember to like, share, comment, subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned because we're playing this league soon. We're probably going to look at mono red prowess in Pioneer in the near future as well. And of course, we're continuing to jam those two decks in Modern. I say continuing, haven't even debuted prowess in Modern on the channel yet, but we're going to continue jamming Rock. We're going to continue dabbling in other BGX archetypes, but Pioneer is what's new and exciting, so we're going to do that too. I did hear your feedback. I know some of you are not as excited about Pioneer, but I know a lot of you really are, so I'll continue to keep the feedback. Foremost, I'll continue to strike a balance, and we're going to continue, of course, to focus above anything else on BGX and Modern, because that's what the channel is about. That's why you like it, right? So thanks again, and I will talk to you soon. Hope everybody out there has a wonderful day.